Here's my 2024 Tallahassee Marathon race recap, where I did my first marathon, but also went sub 3. So technically I Boston qualified, but I'm going to talk about that in a different video. This video is just my overall thoughts on the race, different thoughts I had, because I was carrying a GoPro, but you can't really have a whole conversation with the camera while running, especially if you want to try and go all race effort and go on that red line and try and maximize your heart rate with the amount of running pace you're doing. So I'm going to go mile by mile. I have my whole run on Strava, and I've been loving Strava recently. I mean, the fact that you could access this online, not on just your phone, but also like a laptop or computer, you can't do that with Nike Run Club. So that's just another plus for Strava. But here's my Strava paces. And first off, the very first mile, we'll click that. The very first mile, it's mostly downhill, or it feels that way completely when you're in that race day adrenaline. And I said this right before the race.
Well, you guys both trying to go sub 3. Why don't you guys
is an ideal goal. I think I'm going to start my first 2 miles though at like 7:10. All right. Like 7.
I don't know if you caught that, but I was trying to tell someone else that I knew that I'm going to aim for a 7:10, 7-minute first mile. And that was not even true in the slightest. I mean, it's basically a marathon guideline or rule to not start that fast, And since it's my first time doing it, those cortisol adrenaline levels spike up as soon as I hit go on my watch and the gun goes off. And I end up doing around a 6:20 in real time. I think that's what I had on my watch when I looked down at the mile marker on the course, but then Strava has me here for 6:25. Either way, that is blazing fast compared to the 6:50 that I was going to try and do for the sub 3 hour marathon for an even split the whole way. But once I got done with that first mile, and overall, I do have to say I was being paced by one of my friends for the first 9.5 miles of the race, and he was trying to pace me right at 6:50, or we agreed beforehand to do that slower first couple miles and then bring it down to 6:50 and then kind of negative split the entire race. But it turns out I positive split slightly and kind of banked sometime in the first half, but we'll talk through it. So I was being paced by my friend. We both blazed through it. And what's even funnier is that the person I told that was also trying to do sub 3 in the marathon, it was his first ever marathon. So I told him I'm trying to go slow. You already saw that clip. But what he did was he ran around a 6:10 first mile. And I saw him in front of me. And 10 seconds isn't that much, especially when it's the very first mile of a race. So you could see the person right in front of you. And I was like, he went too fast. And then even with me trying to tell my mind, go slower, I went too fast. So it's really you are going to go out fast in your first marathon. The question is, how are you going to deal with it? And the thing is, I think I dealt with it pretty well, because the next mile, I definitely slowed down right to race pace, 6:52. This is the time in the Tallahassee Marathon where you're going up the tallest point in the entire course. And then right after mile 2 is mile 3, which is a nice downhill. And then you go right back into uphill again. The first 6 miles of the Tallahassee Marathon course is super hilly. It's up and down. And if you're not doing hill training in your marathon training plan, this might not be the race for you. But hey, I got it to work for me. And at the end of the second mile, there's the very first water station. And through the first 2 miles, through the first 9.5 miles, me and my friend who was pacing me, we were intermittently communicating, saying simple sentences or simple phrases, just to get the pacing right. Are you feeling good? Okay, we're doing good. Let's continue this. I feel like I'm holding back. That's a good feeling to have. But at the end of the second mile, there's the first water station. I didn't get anything there, but the water station was a whole learning curve, because last year in my half marathon, I only stopped to get water once, and that was at one water station at mile 10 out of the 13-mile race last year. And then I'm used to 5K races, which you never get water for. So the whole water station thing and trying to pinch the cup to get it down was something I had to get used to, and I'll talk about like the mile 5 ordeal and my first water station usage around like mile 4. But before I get to the rest of the mileage, I do want to talk about my favorite signs that I saw while running. So, you know, there's like the classic, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 26.2, you know, like a Taylor Swift line. I knew I was going to see that, and I was like waiting the whole entire race until I saw it. I saw it, I think, like around halfway through the whole entire race. Took me a while, but saw that sign and other signs that I saw that I think were relatively unique. I mean, there's probably a lot of duplicates with all the posters all across the marathon courses all across the country. But I saw a sign that said, "The British are coming." I thought that was funny. I saw another sign that said, "You thought this was a rum party." And then I saw another one that said, "Run like your mom's using your full name." And I thought that was hilarious. Some different things to bring a smile to your face. The 3rd mile, this is where you start settling in. The first 2 miles of the race, I was just like completely on cloud 9 and was like, is this surreal? Am I officially doing the race after this many months of training? Yes, you are doing the race now. Starting to like get into mile 3 and 4. You are starting to get that laser focused mindset. And luckily, the miles ticked off super fast at this part of the race, as they should. And those legs were feeling so fresh off of the 2 to 3 week taper. And the taper works for sure. And then for mile 4, we hit 6:49 on the dot. And this is where I went to my first water station. So I'm used to carrying my 20-ounce water bottle, and I fill that bottle with some water and then electrolyte powder. And I had that bottle with me the whole entire race. So, but that's only 20 ounces, and you kind of need, I think it's like around 30 to 40 ounces of water when you're doing a full-on marathon. So I knew because I ran out of water in my long runs that I needed to get water at these water stations. So at the very first water station, I'm looking for water, but people are just like standing on both sides, and people are like sometimes holding like 1 cup of Gatorade and 1 cup of water. So at the first station, I was seeking water because I basically already have a Gatorade-like substitute in my hand with me, but I end up picking up Gatorade instead of water. And that's when I realized you kind of have to scream out, or like not scream, but like raise your voice to the volunteers, say like water, 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 as like a question, and then they like hold out, okay, this is water. So you could verify that you're getting water instead of Gatorade. That's something I didn't really know I had to do until this race, but I picked that up after the first water station, and then every other water station after that, which was about every 2 to 3 miles, I would pick up a cup of water, drink some of it, and then if I didn't want to have any more, I would just throw the rest out and just chuck it. So mile 5 and 6, we go around Cascades Park, and Cascades Park is where I did a lot of my speed training, so I was definitely used to running fast in this part of the course. 6:41 to 6:43, knocking out those miles. This is where I got to see my friends and my family for the first time in the race since the starting line. And then mile 7, if you see that elevation, 89 feet. And honestly, mile 7 is the hardest mile in the whole course, elevation-wise. Probably not like mentally or physically, because you know you have miles like 20 through 26 that are the hardest for that. But the hardest elevation-wise is definitely mile 7 in the Tallahassee course, because you're leaving Cascades Park and trying to get to Myers Park. Both beautiful parks, by the way. Love to run there just casually. But in this race, you're going up this huge incline, and then you get to Myers Park, and then you have to go to a golf course, and in between Myers Park and the golf course, there's a huge decline, but then you have to dig deep to climb back up the hills. And how I approach the hills is that I really tried to not look at my watch, like for the pace I was going at up the hill, and I purely went off of feel. So I took a peek when I was going up a couple of hills, and I saw like, oh, I'm going up this hill like 720, 730. But that was fine, because with every up, there's a down. So I probably went, like 620, 630 on the big declines. And I was fine with that. So just go off of feel and just try and keep the same effort and cadence going up the hill as you do on the flat parts of the course. So mile 8 and mile 9, this is where things start to get really exciting for me, because as you leave the golf course, you start to enter this big 2-mile decline segment. Looking at that negative 61 feet, then negative 42 feet, and you could feel this like 2-mile decline as you race, and you're like, okay, I finally got the worst part of the hills and elevation behind me, and then you could just focus on running fast and running your goal paces. Here, knocking out a 6:44, then 6:36, that is pretty blazing fast, and this is where I see my friends and family for another time. And then we go to mile 10. This is where I split off from my pacer for the first half, and then because there's only like 200 runners or participants in the marathon, overall I finished 14th in the race, so you could imagine there's not that many people. It's not like I finished like 4,065. So as I leave my friend who is pacing me, that was a huge help. I don't know if I would have gotten sub 3 if I wasn't paced by my friend Sebas, who paced me for the first 9.5 miles, and then someone else who I met during the race. So we're going into mile 10. I guess I'm just feeling really good because this 5-mile segment from mile 8 to mile 12 is all sub 6:44 per mile. So I guess I was feeling really good at this point. At mile 10, in my mind, I was just like, I really just want to get to mile 13 so I could start the countdown in my head, because the difference in my mind with having 16 miles more to go compared to 13 more miles to go, for some reason, is just huge to me. And then I was like, once I get to 13, it's doable. I could do this. I'm more than halfway through it. I have less to go than I've already done. So miles 10, 11, 12, I'm running by myself. I see like several runners ahead of me, like 3 or 4. And at this point in the race, because I kind of conserved my energy in the first 10 miles, even with that first 6:25 mile, I started to pass several runners. I probably passed, like the 3 or 4 people I saw in front of me at mile 10 by mile 13, by the halfway point. So then we go to mile 13. This is where I see my family once again. The last time I see any family or friends until mile 25. And then with the half marathon splitting off from the marathon at mile 10, that's why I was no longer paced by my friend Sebas. Because of that, the crowd support dies off completely once you reach past that mile 10 point. Because it's a smaller city local marathon, it's not like one of the world majors like Chicago or New York City. There's like zero crowd support in the second half, and you're barely running with other people. So mentally, this is just a very tough course with the hills and the lack of runners beside you. It is good for like just locking in and just enjoying the sound of your footsteps and just the sounds of nature around you. But if you want that crowd support, this is not the race to do it. I'm surprised, honestly, I did so well with all these detrimental conditions. So mile 13, we come in through the halfway point in 1 hour and 27 minutes and 48 seconds. So at this point, I'm honestly pretty happy with myself, because this far into the race, halfway through, I know like the whole saying, the race starts on mile 20. So I'm like, okay, the race really starts in 7 miles. But so far in mile 13, I was feeling good. I would say I start to slow down slightly and start to feel some lactic acid building up in my legs and feel like a cramp almost coming on starting in mile like 15, 16, 17. And just to, I guess we could go through it. So mile 14 is still around the lake, and then we go through this neighborhood where after mile 14, mile 15, I guess we're still doing pretty well. We're 6:45, 6:41 for mile 15, 6:48 for mile 16. But this is where I catch up with the other pacer who is also trying to get a sub 3 marathon. His name's Christian, and me and Christian were running together for basically 10 miles ever since mile 13, 14 until well, I mean, it would have been 10 miles if we finished together, but we broke off around mile 23, 22, so close to 10 miles, maybe like 8, 9 miles in reality. But either way, we were pacing each other, and we both knew our goals. We both knew that we needed to hit 650 per mile. We both knew we kind of banked time, quote unquote, banked time in the first half of the marathon, and it was both our first ever marathon. So we were like, is banking time a good thing? And then as we were running through like 13, 14, and 15, I remember telling Christian like maybe we should ease up a bit, because we were going 641, 645, 638. So I was like, we could slow down a tad here to still get sub 3. And since we were like 2 minutes below in the half marathon split, doing a 128 flat basically, I was like, okay, we could ease into it and brace for the mental challenge ahead of us. So then we get to mile 16, mile 17, mile 18, we got 648, 651, 653. And just to look at my overall pace, I was honestly pretty even around that 650-ish. I start to slow down a tad at the end, but then also like my final surge kind of makes up for the slight slowdowns in the wall miles past mile 20. And then if you look at my heart rate, it was honestly pretty flat the whole time, around 165 to 172, so in between there. But then back to the course, honestly, the hardest part mentally in the Tallahassee Marathon is the mile 18 turnaround point, because this is where you're running away from the finish line, so that is pretty hard mentally. And then you start to see other fast people pass you, and honestly, it was actually like a really cool feeling knowing that I was only 2 miles away from like the first person in the entire race. And the first person finished, I think, with around 2:35, and I finished with around 2:57:35, something like that. So I was only in totality 20 minutes away from first place and 20 minutes away from winning $1,000, because that's the cash prize for this race. I mean, maybe it could be a life goal of mine to win the Tallahassee Marathon. That would be pretty cool and dope. But the mile 18 point, you have to turn around, you go over this mat to make sure you're not cheating. And of course, since it's a small town marathon, you technically can cheat in certain parts of the course. I did not, because that means you're only cheating yourself, and what type of feeling you're going to get after the race, after you finish. Like, you're just going to feel guilt and all your work was for nothing. So obviously I didn't cheat the course at all, but there are ways you can cheat the course. But mile 18 is not that point, because you do have to go over a mat. And then you turn around, and then this is when you start seeing people behind you, because I mean, it's basically like a whole 6 mile turnaround. So I mean, for the next miles until you meet up with the half marathon course point again, until mile 23. So mile 18 to 23, you're passing right by all of the slower people, and you could start to see a lot of people walking and not really going that fast anymore, and starting to visually have their pain on their face, and you're like, oh, okay. And overall, my gel plan went perfectly. I gelled at mile 4, 8, 12, 16, 19, and 22. I will talk about a water issue coming up here, but I went non-caffeinated to caffeinated gels in between Honey Stinger and Goo, and that worked perfectly. I had water with me in my bottle, so whenever I opened up a gel, I would just wash it down with the electrolyte water I had in my hand. So I didn't have to wait for a water station to open up a gel, which I don't know how other people take gels unless they're water-based, because there are some gels that you don't need water to take it down. All right, so mile 18, 19, we have a really nice one, 6:48. And mile 20, this is where you start to see some gaps. This is where my legs are, like, my whole mind knows I cannot do like sub 6:30 miles right now and make it to the end. This is where I knew I was going like max effort, because these miles were so tough. At some points I wanted to just like walk for like 10 seconds with Christian and then just like let him go in front of me. But we just kept on pushing each other and we kept on running together and we kept that up for a while. I do want to talk about how I approached the water station. So after the first water station, I skipped it. The second water station, I got the Gatorade when I wanted water. I started yelling out, or not yelling out, but, you know, raising my voice to the volunteers, water, please, water. So I stopped to get water at the places, but whenever I went to a water station to get water, I learned I cannot get the water in my mouth if I'm going like 650 race pace. Like I started to adapt the strategy of, you know, raising my voice for water, but also literally walking for like 5 seconds, make sure the water gets into my body and down. And then I kind of like sprint for like 10 meters a little bit to like catch up for the 5 seconds of walking. And then I'm back to my normal pace. So that's what I had to do, because if you don't have a spray bottle or like a straw type thing, I don't know how you could run race pace and still get all that water into your mouth. I think it's honestly impossible. I guess I'll probably test it out in future marathon races, which I think I'll do. So we go to mile 20, mile 21, 6:57. This is a super flat part of the course, and it's honestly beautiful because you have a ton of tree cover. You're like next to trees that are like 3-4 stories tall. You have like little lakes behind you on your left and right, and you're honestly grinding away the mileage, and you know at this point that you're heading closer and closer to the finish line, and that's an awesome feeling. So as I go to mile 22, it's 7:03, so a little bit above marathon pace. 23, 7:11, also above marathon pace, 2 consecutive miles above 6:50, and kind of really above it, 15 to 20 seconds above race pace, or ideal race pace. But it's kind of like giving yourself some leeway, because you know as a runner, when your goal is sub 3, I don't care if I get 2:59.59. As long as I get sub 3, that's my A goal. That's a complete win. Anything else is a bonus. So at this point in the race, I wrote down the sub 3 hour marathon pace for mile 16. I had that written on my arm. And then mile 20 also written on my arm. And as I already went through mile 16 and 20, but I saw and was telling Christian, okay, we are about 2 to 3 minutes ahead of the 2:59.59 finish. And because of that, I think me and Christian both ideally slowed down a bit. And Christian and me, we actually split up at mile 23. I start to, I guess, just continue to do around 650 marathons. We'll go through it. And then I think Christian slows down to like 610, 620, 630. Because, I mean, he ended up getting sub 3, but he got a way tighter margin because he did like 2:59.30 and I finished 2:57.30. So those minute differences literally happened in the last 3 miles, because we were together at the start of mile 23 and then we split up. So I kept on doing my thing, but in between mile 21 and 25, I swear there was not a single water station, and I was starting to run out of water in my bottle, and this is when I was kind of going into Mayday mode, and I started to get this like cramp, this water cramp in like my liver, stomach area that like felt super tight at mile 23, mile 24, and I was like, I need water so bad, like please, water station, where are you? And I finally knocked out a 6:52 24 mile. This goes up a big hill. I don't know how I did that mile that fast. I guess I was just so excited for the end. Mile 25, this is where I finally get that water that I desperately wanted. I could start to hear the race crowd in front of me, and this is just the point where like I really just want to get this over with. I know I could do like a 9-minute mile right now and still get sub 3, but honestly I just want to run fast as I can to get this over with faster. And as we head to mile 26, this is where it shows that I guess I paced really good, or I picked a really good race pace goal, because my first mile was 6:20 and then my last mile was 6:20, but this is where I was emptying out the tank. I knew I had a little bit more in me. And what's funny is that like my friend always says like I don't sprint fast enough in these like half marathon and marathon races. He's like, you gotta all out sprint. And like you could see here at the end, I definitely start to push my pace a bit. And then as we enter the corner where you could start to see the finish line 0.4 miles ahead of you, as I was cutting that corner, I started to realize like, wow, I'm gonna do the sub 3 because I felt decent enough. Like I was exhausted by the point, but I know in my mind I could run 0.4 miles. I could have run the last 0.4 miles at a 10-minute pace and still got a sub 3. So I was just like overjoyed, and I started to shed a couple tears, but that like sadness, or not sadness emotion, but just like whatever makes you cry from feeling like overly happy, that emotion went away to just being like super hyped. And as I went down with only 0.3 miles left and 0.2 miles left, this is, I mean, you can see here, but as I saw the finish line, I was just like, let's go, we did it. And then right before the corner, I do have to say at mile 25, or in the middle of mile 26, I guess, because it's over in this area, I hand off my water bottle to one of my friends. Actually, the friend who paced me for the first 10 miles, he finished his half marathon race and was waiting for me there to cheer me on. But I hand off my water bottle. I still have the GoPro in my hand. Didn't really film with it at all. But I hand off my water bottle and I'm like, okay, I got that like weight off of me, even though the water bottle probably weighs like less than a pound. I feel a little bit more free. So I already tell you about crying around rounding the corner. I see the finish line. I start to go in between 5:50, 5:40 pace. I peak out at 5:30 minutes per mile pace, and I finish the race super strong. Not as strong as, I guess, sub 5 minutes, which is what my friend wants me to do, to sprint the whole thing. But I mean, like 5:30 minutes per mile, that's like getting there with like all out sprinting. And even though my friend was not satisfied with that enough. And the weird thing about this Tallahassee Marathon race is that because it's so small, you could take all of the corners as tight as possible. And I finished the race and my watch wasn't at 26.2 miles. Like I mean, what is a marathon in mileage? Right at the point of finishing, I don't think my watch was at 26.21. It might have been at like 26.19. And since this was my first ever marathon, I really wanted to get like that marathon achievement in Strava, in Nike Run Club. So right after I finished, I get my medal and I start to run like 100 more meters just to make sure. And I like run up my watch all the way to 26.30 just to make sure, for sure, without a doubt, that I was going to get those marathon achievements on my watch, because I wasn't cutting any part of the course, but taking like all of the sharpest turns, and then just a slight GPS discrepancy in between reality and what the watch is seeing. I guess I was like just like 50 meters short of getting that marathon distance on my watch when I finished. And apparently every other like world major usually go like 0.1 miles or 0.2 miles over the distance of a marathon in the race. But because it's a smaller marathon, you actually, I guess, save like 0.1 miles off your legs, if that helps. If that helped me get a faster time, possibly. But what's also cool is that along with the elevation, you can see my pace kind of accumulate with the going up the hill. So like going up this very first hill here, I went all the way down to like 7:40, 7:30. And then going up this other hill, my pace went down all the way to 7:36. But that's okay. I don't need to sprint up this hill. I just need to keep the same heart rate, same effort. And then going up this hill here, I guess I slowed down a bit to 7:20. And then on the other mile 24 hill, I guess I slowed down to around the mid 7:30s. but then I finished super strong, and that is my race recap for the Tallahassee Marathon. And we'll put this at the end. I am so glad I didn't have to go number 1 or 2 at any point during the race. That was like always a concern of mine while running this whole 3-hour event with something this long. How do you avoid using the bathroom? Thankfully, I didn't need to. And I forgot to mention this, but my whole music idea of like listening with AirPods in noise cancellation mode to Bad Bunny for 3 hours was a mistake. I would, one, switch AirPods to transparency mode so I could actually like hear the crowd and hear people cheering, and if I want to talk to the other runners around me to give them encouragement or to receive encouragement or just talk strategy, I would love to actually like be able to hear the people next to me without having to take out the AirPod and talk and then put it back in. And honestly forgot how to change the AirPod modes from noise cancellation to transparency during the race because I was so focused on running, and also listening to the same artists and Spanish music, which isn't my primary language, for 3 hours also was not the move. For 1 hour and 40 minutes, I suppose it's fine. But for 3 hours, almost doubling that, it would have been nice to make up a playlist with different artists and different kind of moods just all throughout. Because by like the 2 hour and 30 mark, I was kind of sick of the same playlist I was listening to.